Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Middleton, and today I wanted to talk to you about some executive leadership in student life. So generally, I chose this position because I want to continue to stay in student life and in that umbrella, and potentially work my way up the chain. And depending upon how far I go educationally, that would end at the vice president level. General information about student life, depending upon the size of the institution, will also determine the division size. But the vice president of student life will have multiple titles under the same umbrella, which would be vice president of student life, vice president of student affairs, student enrollment, engagement, and success, and so on and so forth. All of that falls under that same umbrella. Again, depending upon the size of the school, the vice president will have at least potentially two, maybe even more AVPs, and those AVPs are either going to be associate vice presidents or assistant vice presidents. And the reporting structure is going to be determined by how the AVPs are divided amongst the division. Um, I chose it because this position directly impacts students' lives, and some would say as equally as important as academic, if not more than academically. So let's talk about some of the people that I spoke with for this project. First things first, we have Mike Knox or Michael Knox. He's the Vice President of Student Enrollment Engagement Success at WT-AMU, and he's been in student life for about 20 years. And I thought it would be unique to ask a challenging question, but also something that I would say is a theme for them to quote. And Mike said, that he wants to ensure that his division is making the college experience for each student unique and ultimately successful. He said, like, no matter the size of the population, it's very important that every student feels home when they're on campus. The next person I spoke with was Monshare Spencer. She is currently the interim assistant provost at Houston Baptist University. And this is a private institution, so they actually don't have vice presidents, they have provosts and vice provosts. But they do, in fact, have a president, which is unique. So Monshare has been at HBU specifically for 18 years, and all of those she's been at HBU. She has served many different roles, but all of those roles have been under the student life umbrella. And Monshare stated that her theme was that she wants to make every year at HBU better than the last, and she does that by trying new things and keeping traditions alive at the same time. Finally, I interviewed Dr. Mindy Sutton. She is the Associate Vice President and Dean of Students at Southern Methodist University, SMU. She's worked in higher education for 25 years, with the first 8 of those years being academic. She was an instructor, but she followed those up with student life and never looked back. Dr. Sutton noted that, she is loves that academics are there and they're great, but her passion is student life because it gives her more rewards, and those rewards come from unique programs and student interactions on a day-to-day basis. So, what are some of the characteristics of the VP role and student life in general? So, VPs, they have to manage the entire division, and it's important that the entire division, and this could have 100, 200, 30, it really just depends on the school, have multiple people with multiple departments underneath it. So, the VP has to manage that division with leadership, understanding, effective management, and communication, very key. The VP student life, they're pretty pivotal in making decisions, especially as it relates to money for staff, but also the money that comes in from student fees for students and how that money is being used. AVPs are responsible for their division or their departments, I should say, within their respective areas, and those could be divided amongst however many AVPs are selected. For example, West Texas A&M has 3 AVPs, 1 being an associate and 2 being assistant, and the departments underneath them are divided fairly equally. So let's talk about some of the support, right? Since the structure is unique, support is going to also be weird. And I call this helping hand because support is really universal when it comes to student life. There's no one department that can be siloed. Everyone has to work together. So, the leaders in this division, they really support the mission by promoting student growth and development. That's just extremely important, that student life is growing outside of the classroom and learning outside of the classroom and becoming an effective leader, or even an effective student or an effective person outside of the classroom. Vice presidents and AVPs, they promote the programs related to education, but they also bring in challenging minds for debates or any other aspect that really is for the students and ignites kind of self-reflection and a style of mentoring. And more importantly, the Student Life Umbrella AVPs, vice presidents, and their staff that provide a safe space for students. And the students are allowed to be themselves, and they're allowed to explore what that means. And they build these relationships with themselves, with staff, with faculty, and with other students. So, some of the finances and funding that was related to student life, money can kind of come from anywhere, but two of the main sources that come from financially for student life and the VP and AVP roles that they have to discuss are first would be federal. The government gives an institution a certain amount of money each year. Financial aid gives money, and so on and so forth. And then the institution can determine how that money is divided amongst the students, amongst other departments, amongst the division, and so on. And then the second biggest form of income for the Student Life Umbrella would be the student service fee. Almost every institution has this fee, and in this fee comes money for students to have access to certain programs, certain softwares. This allows students to get free tickets at football games rather than having to pay for them. Um, there's so many different factors that the student service fee comes with. Student service fee actually pays for certain people's positions. I know that at West Texas A&M University, the student service fee pays for the student conduct office. So that money that comes in really like facilitates for the students. So some of the stakeholders, and I think this is really important. Students are the stakeholders for as it relates to student life. One of the things that I thought was unique that Monshare said was she said my first three jobs would not exist without students and the student service fee. More importantly, I would love what I do and continue to do it for so long if it wasn't for the students. And I think it's important to note that this is why they are the stakeholders. The institution itself wouldn't be an institution if it wasn't for the students. As it relates to another factor, the personnel. So we'll talk about like vice presidents. If there's the student body is failing in certain ways, the vice president is responsible for finding those ways to make sure that it's better and fixing things that they can. And specifically the AVPs are going to be created and put to a task force that comes to find out what the issues are, removing those issues or barriers so that students can grow and be successful. And all of those things are potential factors for sure, and why the personnel and staff are stakeholders. So let's talk about some of the issues pre and post COVID. We're talking about retention, engagement, student conduct, and then how did it change after the fact? So with retention, we're looking at before the pandemic, colleges, universities always want to talk about retention because it's forever going to be an issue. How can we get students to stay? How can we get students to matriculate between semesters and end up eventually graduating? And so this is kind of the norm, but it's noted that attrition is a multidimensional problem, and the authors, or Robert, I should say, talked about the factors including financial, reputational, and even quality of service issues that pose risks for retention. So next, we're going to talk about students wanting the experience and the engagement, and the engagement of students. This is kind of outside of the classroom, but also inside the classroom. How are students engaged, and how do they feel that engagement is helping them to be successful? There's a strong correlation between positive student engagement and attrition and student achievement and leading to graduation. And so that was definitely an issue prior to COVID, and it's definitely a concern still. Finally, prior to COVID, let's talk about student conduct. There's always going to be student conduct issues because there's multiple diverse ideas and mentalities that are involved on campuses all over. And so, with that being said, student conduct is a concern. How are we teaching students to learn from their mistakes? How are we helping educate them with outcomes within the sanction? So, in the beginning, prior to COVID and early times, most campuses employed a legal system of justice. They pretty much gave out crime level punishments for what could be a simple cheating violation, and so on and so forth. So, restorative justice is an issue, and as an issue for cases that are not really criminal but definitely important. After COVID, we're talking about engagement again. Now students are just completely online, and it's very difficult for institutions to figure out how to engage these students at that level. So we as institutions and as higher ed, we talked about finding ways. Let's talk about a mass video watching session where it could be multiple screens watching videos from student life or student engagement division or department. And what do these programs look like? And that's what the Student Life Umbrella is doing. They're trying to find ways to get students engaged when we can't physically see them in person. And so we're talking about achievement and nutrition after the fact. When COVID hit, students were just really really willing to drop out and go to work and try to find ways to make money because that was a very intense and very important need for them. And so, how do we get students to come back? And then, more importantly, how do we get them engaged enough to want to continue to retain and matriculate between semesters and ultimately finish school? The authors talk about how important it is, and they're gathering research to show that they weren't matriculating during COVID. And now we're trying to determine the factors that cause this lack of matriculation and fix them before it's too late. But some of the competencies and other issues with pros and cons. So to be a leader and either vice president or associate vice president or assistant, you have to have these leadership skills. You want to be objective at all times, create, promote, and implement student learning and development strategies. I really want to say being proactive is definitely key, and the strong understanding of assessment and strategic planning. Assessment is just key. You want to be able to show people why what you're doing is working or what things need to change. Some of the pros, I thought Dr. Mindy Sutton said this very well. She said, no matter how many days or years I've worked, you can make each day unique, and it keeps you on your toes. She said, I like that. It's a pro because I'm always learning something new, and it's never truly boring. And that's important for us in higher ed to continue that mentality. Some of the cons, and I'll get a quote from Monshare Spencer. She said, "There's no such thing as a steady 8 to 5 in student life," and that's pretty much at any institution, including junior colleges, without housing options. She said that there's just no way that you can just work 8 to 5 and be okay with what the work that you're putting out. There's going to be times where you're going to be working after 5 o'clock, and the cons are those duties as assigned that are stated in your contract. Those are kind of endless, and that's important. So just know that 8 to 5 just really isn't it, and it causes burnout and potentially high turnover rates. So I hope that was a quick understanding of the executive leadership styles in student life and why it still is important and some of the issues that are contributing to that. Please enjoy this, and here are some of the references that were used in this presentation. I hope you have a great day and good luck.